Well, it's up to Tanner McKee to secure the NFC's number 2 seed for the Philadelphia Eagles, and the Washington Commanders are going to play spoiler. Locked on Eagles, Locked on Commanders. It's crossover Thursday.
You are Locked On NFL Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Thanks so much for making Locked On Eagles and Locked On Commanders your first listen each and every day. And thanks for making the Locked On Podcast Network the number one sports podcast network. I'm Louis DiBiase, host of the Locked On Eagles podcast. He's David Harrison, host of Locked On Commanders. And today's Crossover Thursday is presented by Prize Picks. Download the Prize Picks app today. Use our code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. So it's going to be the Commanders' season finale for 2025, 2026 now, and the Philadelphia Eagles. They're going to be playing in the postseason, David, but the seeding still is not decided. They are the 3 seed right now. They've clinched the NFC East for the second year in a row, but the 2 seed is still up for grabs if the Bears lose to the Detroit Lions on Sunday and the Eagles win against the Commanders. They would be the 2 seed. So the Eagles have a lot to play for, even though there's backups in this game. And the Commanders, I'm sure after that chippy game 2 weeks ago, are going to want to spoil that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, the Commanders have a lot to play for as well, even though, like you said, this is the last game of the 2025, regular season and their season just in general, not a place that they thought they would be. This is a team that still has a lot of pride, still has a lot of energy, still has a lot of determination to go out there and try to make something happen. And even if it's not necessarily just to kind of prevent the Eagles from having the best seeding possible, it's just, it's a matter of, like we said, pride. And that's what this locker room really is. I was actually talking to one of the players that's on injured reserve, and I was telling him that, this is my 4th year on this beat, right? So I'm not like a grizzled veteran of the Washington Commanders beat by any means, but in the 4 years I've been here, I've never seen or experienced or noticed, I should say, players on IR coming back to the team to finish their rehab. And for those who don't know, peek behind the curtains, when players are on injured reserve, they don't have to do their rehab with the team. They can do it at home. They can do it wherever they want to. That's part of their right as players. And here you have a lot of players returning during their rehab. And it really stood out to me. And he said to me that this is the best organization, like the best team, not from like a talent perspective, right? But think like your workspace environment. This is the best team that he's ever been on that has had such a struggling season. And that really says something about the culture that Washington is installing. And obviously culture is just the start of it, right? But the hope is that while the Philadelphia Eagles are still continuing, like you said, to get those back-to-back division titles and do things that this division hasn't been able to do in a very long time, the hope is that with things certainly, from the sounds of it, looking a little bit up in Dallas, I think things are looking up in New York, depending on the direction their coaching staff goes. Maybe we can get this NFC East division back to being the most competitive division in a good way, not like the most competitive because everybody's having a down season, but because everybody's having a good season. And obviously both these teams want to be right in the mix of that.
Yeah, David, I feel like for the Commanders, this isn't the down season of the Raiders or even the Giants to a degree where it feels like there's still a lot of steps to be taken in a rebuild. I feel like there's a lot of optimism from Washington because you add context to the situation of the season with Jaden Daniels dealing with injuries all year. I feel like they think next year you get healthy, you improve that defense, you get a little bit younger, probably, I'm sure, on both sides of the football. You can get right back to where you were 2 years ago, or last season. It will be 2 seasons ago next year in the NFC Championship. So I feel like when you add context to their season, it feels a little bit different than a team like, Vegas, for instance, I point back to, who just, kind of seem lost in this what are we doing kind of rebuild. That doesn't feel like the case for the Commanders.
No, I 100% agree with you. And to use the Raiders. Sorry if there's any Raiders fans tuning in.
I know we're
this.
dragging Vegas.
But hey, welcome. Yeah, no, I mean, you know what? We love you. We love you coming through for Locked On Eagles, Locked On Commanders. So welcome, Raiders fans, if you're here. But like you said, like it just feels like a team that's kind of devoid of talent. You know what I mean? It's not that the talent didn't get the best out of themselves, or the coaching staff didn't get the best out of themselves. They just don't have the horses. And for the Washington Commanders, it's actually been a little bit refreshing hearing the coaching staff, not using it as an excuse, but being willing to admit that with all the injuries, it really is kind of hard to know where they are as a team, kind of really evaluate the 2025 season. And I think that when they get into this offseason Monday, starting Monday morning, right, what they've got to do as evaluators, coaches, GM, Adam Peters, all those guys, is just be as brutally honest as you possibly can. Try to, what information you do have about the players, about the units and all that, just be as brutally honest as you can. Don't put on any lenses. Don't try to paintbrush over any blemishes. Like
Right.
that's the only way you can really come about it, because while context obviously is important, if you allow context to dictate the conversation, which you might end up with as a team that is 80% the same, and while the context might tell you that's okay, if you come into 2026 and realize, oh, like we actually did have some flaws that we didn't necessarily identify, that's going to set you back even further. So it'll be interesting, because this does feel like a team that's better than their record, even though they always say that your record is who you are. And with a high draft pick coming in the first round, top 10, all that kind of stuff, like it seems like a team that can get better salary cap wise. They've got over $100 million projected cap space, with a couple of easy moves, and that top 10 first round draft pick. We'll see what Adam Peters does with it. They have a lot of opportunities to get a lot of good players and potentially take another leap back, right? Like we go from 4-win Commanders, depending on what happens on Sunday, to 12-win Commanders, back to 4 or 5-win Commanders, and then who knows, maybe back to 12-win Commanders
Right.
in 27 or 2026, and Commanders fans are just not going to know where to be on the roller coaster, and who knows, maybe we can get an Eagles Commanders rematch in the NFC Championship game. I know I would love to do that, because whether it's the Link or South Northwest Stadium, I know the environment would be electric.
Oh, it is definitely always at Lincoln Financial Field, and the Eagles are going to have at least one home playoff game. They are the 3 seed right now, winning the NFC East. They clinched that against the Commanders 2 weeks ago. But David, the storyline for the Eagles is they are still, they have a chance at the 2 seed. Doesn't look like they're going to try for it very hard, as apparently Nick Sirianni is going to not start any of Jalen Hurts, A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, Jalen Carter on the defensive side of the football. Like Lane Johnson won't be in this game. It's going to be the Tanner McKee show, Tank Bigsby, Jahan Dotson. If they want a chance at this 2 seed, it's going to be up to the backups. And I do think those players have shown that they could beat a team that's down like the Commanders. But I do kind of disagree with the approach. I understand having a mini bye week and getting rested for the playoffs, but in this year's NFC, getting that 2 seed is pretty important, because with how good the wild card teams are in this conference, there's a good chance that there could be some upsets in the first and second round, like there was last year when your Commanders took down the Lions, and the Eagles, as the 2 seed, did get home field advantage throughout the playoffs. And that's so huge. When the playoffs run through Philadelphia, normally they make it to the Super Bowl. So it is kind of, it's a close decision. I understand both sides of it. I understand resting the starters and kind of creating your own bye week, since you can't get the 1 seed. But I think that 2 seed is equally as important as rest. So it'll be up to Tanner McKee, and I think they have a chance, but I maybe would have played some starters at least for like the first 2.5 quarters and see where you're at.
Yeah, there's always a chance, you know what I mean? And any given Sunday, like Tanner McKee is an NFL quarterback, and I don't think anybody's going to come into this game defensively for the Commanders trying to underestimate him. Tank basically sealed the deal, right? Like he was essentially the death blow in the last game. I know there were some other blows that came after that, but he was basically the death blow of that game, and he certainly got talent. I mean, yeah, there's certainly no underestimation of what this team is going to be capable of. Speaking of Philadelphia Eagles, with their backups on the field, and look, this Washington Commanders offense has not been great. I know statistically, if you just stat scout this team, you're like, oh man, top 10 rushing offense, top 10 red zone offense, and all that kind of stuff. It looks good on paper, but when you really look at what's been happening recently with this team, they went 1 for 3 against the Dallas Cowboys in the red zone just last week. The Philadelphia Eagles have always been a little bit of a different beast anyway, even when going up against a statistically strong Washington Commanders offense, and the trend just simply hasn't been what the stats would tell you they are all season long. So I think there's certainly an opportunity for the Eagles to do that. The Link is going to be, like you said, that environment. I mean, they would love nothing more than to send the Commanders home with a loss against Tanner McKee. Like Eagles fans would love nothing more than that for that to happen, to come through the Locked On Commanders comments after the game and do all that kind of stuff. I got bad news for Eagles fans. You're not going to hear a cocky Locked On Commanders show talking about the backups are in. This is going to be an easy walk-off win for the Commanders. Like that's not going to happen. So you're going to have to talk trash to other people than the Locked On Commanders podcast, at least. But I mean, look, this is going to be a good game. I think it's still going to be a competitive game. I'm with you. Like it kind of smells like playing not to lose versus playing to win. And like you said, those number 1 seeds can get toppled. Nobody is untouchable in the NFC. And what you don't want if you're the Eagles is necessarily have to look back on this. And this is a decision that when we get to the end of February will be looked at with hindsight. But if you get into a situation where the Eagles have to go on the road in the NFC Championship game against the number 2 seed, Chicago Bears, and they lose that game, that's going to come up. Like that question is going to come up, and so it's kind of a what if. But I'm always a play to win type of guy. And if we're also being honest about it, Louis, you know this better than I do, that Eagles offense hasn't necessarily looked like it's fully locked in and in sync. So you need those reps to try to get to that point before you hit the postseason.
It's a tough decision because at the same time, if they go out there and Jalen Hurts bangs up his ankle on a scramble play, then we look like idiots in that way as well, if you're the Philadelphia Eagles. So it's a tough decision, but I also think of it from the perspective of like who you're playing in the first round. There's not an easy gimme game in the NFC this year in the postseason, but right now they would play the Rams in round one, and they've beaten them 3 times in the last 2 seasons, but the Rams, I think, from start to finish this year have been the most consistent team in the NFC. They're beatable on the road, of course, but yeah, I think it's a really tough call. But I do think Tanner McKee, Tank Bigsby, Jahan Dotson, they will give the Eagles a chance to win this game. There's some close matchups that we'll get into coming up next. Locked on Eagles, Locked on Commanders. It's Crossover Thursday. All right, guys, today's episode of Locked on Eagles and Locked on Commanders is sponsored by Robinhood. Nobody knows your money goals better than you. Robinhood puts you in control of your money with tools that work as hard as you do. Locking in on every opening, beating your PR, beating it again, channel that drive into your money. Robinhood puts you in control of your money. Trade stocks and ETFs, options, futures, and crypto, all in one platform. You can now build and execute your own trades from a desktop with Robinhood Legends advanced tools, or take advantage of the new Robinhood strategies with a tailored portfolio managed by a team of experts. You expect more from yourself, expect more from your money. Get started today at Robinhood.com/yourmoney. Again, that's Robinhood.com/yourmoney. Your money, your move. It's Crossover Thursday, Locked on Eagles, Locked on Commanders. Thanks for making us your first listen each and every day, and thanks for making the Locked on Podcast Network the #1 sports podcast network. David, it's going to be the season finale for the Washington Commanders, and like you said, there's auditions for 2026. They're trying to end the season on a high note. This isn't the typical blown-up year from a team that has, no path down the road to get back into contention like they were in 2024. So it's an important game for them for the future, and for the Eagles, it's kind of interesting. It's an important game for the now to try to get that 2 seed like we were talking about, but also, like, we're going to get into matchups here. I'm really curious to watch Tanner McKee because when you look across the NFL with how many teams could potentially need a starting quarterback and with how well he looks every time he's on the football field. And again, it's a small sample size, but I think it could also help his trade value. Like, when I'm talking about matchups today, I'm really excited to watch Tanner McKee on Sunday.
Yeah, listen, man, you know better than I do. There are Eagles fans that are not fully bought into Jalen Hurts, even with like
after the Chargers game, people were calling for McKee to start. I mean, it was crazy.
And if McKee goes out there and balls out against the Washington Commanders starting defense, right? Like those calls are going to get a little
Nobody
bit
is
louder.
more popular in the city of Philadelphia than the backup quarterback, David, especially if Nick Foles won the Super Bowl.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. Look, I've always been a fan of Tanner McKee. I liked him coming out of Stanford. I thought maybe there'd be an opportunity the Commanders might target him, later in the draft themselves. Tavita Pritchard, now the head coach at Stanford, was his quarterbacks coach, offensive coordinator for a period of time. And Tavita always spoke very highly of Tanner. So I'm not surprised to see Tanner having, even in minimal opportunities or whatever, to have the success that he's had and that Eagles fans enjoy, because I think he's a very solid, very good quarterback. And I do think that he's got, a potential future as maybe like a Nick Foles type of guy. Like the career trajectory, he's not likely a, Joe Burrow or, like a franchise quarterback in weight, but a solid starting caliber quarterback. I think he could certainly become that. So yeah, down the road, maybe some trade bait. Look, Jahan Dotson, you know what I mean? Like he wasn't traded from Washington because he was just devoid of talent. He was traded from Washington because he just wasn't a mentality fit for this organization with the direction they were taking, and that's fine. So he's going to have some motivation, to show up. He's always got motivation to show up. And then, Tank is a guy that I even targeted in free agency for the Commanders when he was available as well. So, yeah, again, these are NFL rosters. And I know that, we like to talk about, like, well, the bottom of our roster, like, that guy sucks, that guy sucks. And if you've ever gotten to watch these guys up close and personal when they're putting together these game plans, the amount of athletic ability the guys who suck in the NFL have is astounding. It's amazing. You know what I mean? And so there's no devoid of talent in this game. And I think that it's going to be very important because this Eagles team is going to challenge the Commanders defense specifically in some ways, but I think will help you kind of show not just like the floor of this team, because I think it's important not to over or undersell your opponent, but really just how much work do you really need? Because if Tanner McKee can come in against the defense that likes to say they disguise everything and all this stuff. It's one thing for Jalen Hurts to pick you apart. It's another thing for Tanner McKee to pick you apart, just like it's another thing for Kenny Pickett to pick you apart. And let's not forget the one win that Dan Quinn and the Commanders have against the Eagles came thanks to a Devontae Smith drop pass, which almost never happens in that situation. And if it doesn't happen in that situation, the Kenny Pickett just beats you. So it's going to give you a good sign of where this defense really is at the end of the season and how much work they have to make on themselves in this offseason.
Yeah, it's really not going to be this limited offense that just relies solely on Tank Bigsby. And I think Tank has been great this year. Honestly, at times he's been more efficient running the football, especially up the middle, than Saquon Barkley. I think they're going to lean on Bigsby a lot in this game. But Tanner McKee, I mean, he does not have mobility, that's for sure. And that's part of why I don't think teams would be interested in making him their franchise quarterback. But he does have some really plus traits, like his size. He'd be 6'5", 6'6", really big guy, can see over the line of scrimmage, throws well with anticipation, I think, has a strong arm. And when he's been out there, you look at the game last year, it was Kenny Pickett against Washington, but McKee did get some reps against the Cowboys at the end of the year. He started against the Giants week 18, and him and Dotson had a pretty strong connection. Like, they did push the football down the field. If you can get him going with like under center play action, I do think this could be a balanced attack on Sunday. And so that's why, again, I disagree with the approach of not trying for the 2 seed at all from a starter, like play your guys perspective. But I do think this could be a close game. I think these backups that the Eagles have, it's one of the deepest rosters in football, in my opinion. I don't think that this is going to be a blowout, at least in Washington's side.
Yeah, it's interesting because there's also a what-if, dimension to this to where if, and, I'm going to knock on wood here, that Saquon Barkley gets injured in the playoffs and Tank Bigsby has to come in, some of these reps he's going to get this week may establish some things, or, as a play caller, you might look back and say, well, Tank did really good on this type of a look or has experience in this type of a look. And so it's going to be interesting. And on the Commander side of things, Johnny Newton's coming off of a career game, 3 sacks against the Dallas Cowboys last week and 5 sacks total for the season. And that's great. But something that you also notice when you watch that Cowboys game is they got a lot of stuff up the middle. And one of the strengths of the Washington Commanders defense has actually been their up the middle run defense. That's where Daron Payne has been living all season long. And because of Johnny Newton's explosion, there's been an uptick in conversation on whether or not this team should or will trade or release Daron Payne this offseason, save that cap space, and then potentially move Johnny Newton up in the depth chart. But the question with Johnny is, are you going to be able to become a better run defender? Because if on the reps that Johnny gets in there with Daron Payne projected to play this weekend, if Tank Bigsby can take advantage of that opportunity, it's one thing to not want to pay Daron Payne $28 million against your salary cap because of his lack of total upside, right? Like, he's not a top 10 D tackle, but it's another thing to put a guy like Johnny Newton in there and say, well, he's got more upside. And then in 2026, you can't stop anybody up the middle in the run game. And it doesn't really matter what the upside is. So this is a game we're going up against a runner like Tank Bigsby, going up against a quarterback like Tanner McKee, which you mentioned that it's actually funny. I remember reading a draft report. I can't remember what it was because it was so long ago, where it said, Tanner McKee is just a statue in the pocket. But guess what? The Statue of Liberty is also just a statue, because I think it's funny. No offense to Tanner, let's not compare Tanner McKee to the Statue of Liberty in grades of statues, right? But it just reminded me of that quip. So so it's still, like I said, a very, very interesting matchup, secondary-wise, obviously, against Tanner. But then also run defense-wise when Johnny specifically is in there. And also Daron, because Daron, this is an opportunity for him, if he can help stifle Tank when he's in there, to say, listen, this is why, even though I'm being paid so much against your salary cap, you need to come to the table and work on a new deal with me and maybe lower the cap hit, but keep me around a little bit longer.
Yeah, I think the middle of the trenches on both sides of the ball is going to be interesting to watch in this game. You talked about Newton against, Bigsby. I think that's going to be something that really could dictate this game. But also on the other side of the ball, the Eagles have a lot of depth at defensive tackle. Jalen Carter, of course, everybody knows the breakout year of Jordan Davis, and Moro Ijoma, who I think's been as good as Milton Williams was last year, if not better. I mean, he has 6 sacks this year and has consistently led the Eagles up front with pass rushing efficiency. But even behind them, Byron Young's going to start in this game, former 3rd-round pick that actually, when Jalen Carter was out in 3 games, Young had 2.5 sacks, so he'll be out there a lot. Josh Uche, before they brought in Jalen Phillips, before they brought in BG, Brandon Graham back from retirement, and Nolan Smith came back from IR. Uche actually was, I think, rejuvenating his career compared to last year when he was a healthy scratch with the Chiefs after getting traded from the Patriots. So Uche will be out there. Even Ty Robinson, a 4th-round pick that I liked last year coming out of Nebraska, has some pretty good pass rush ability. So I think just you look at the trenches, of course, that's an obvious answer for what's going to dictate games. But I think in this one specifically, in the middle of the lines, that's going to be something I'm interested to watch.
Yeah, and for the Washington Commanders offensive line against that unit, man, a lot of backups playing this game. Tyler Biadasz is on IR, so Nick Allegretti is going to get opportunity at center. And I'll tell you, man, Nick loves playing center. Like, he was so juiced. Unfortunately, Tyler obviously going out. You hate that, but he was so juiced to get the opportunity to play center, set the protections and do those things. So he's going to want to do that. Andrew Wiley getting an opportunity to get in there as a depth player. Brandon Coleman, presumably going to be playing left tackle. So it's an interesting conversation of depth because Andrew Wiley is a projected free agent, or he's a pending free agent. Nick Allegretti has 1 year left on his deal. A lot of people have wondered if the team is going to move on from him as well, and if they can come in there and be solid against even that Eagles second team because of that potential they have in that defensive front behind those main guys. Then it gives you a case if you're Adam Peters in an offseason where a lot of people are looking for you to do a lot of things.
Yeah.
The more areas you can have quantifiable reasons to feel confident in what you have already, the less effort you have to put into those groups, the more effort you can put into the others.
It's going to be interesting to watch this game on Sunday. Keys to victory coming up next. It's Locked On Eagles and Locked On Commanders. Today's Crossover Thursday for Locked On Eagles and Locked On Commanders is presented by PrizePicks. Whether you're starting a new routine or jumping into player projections for the first time, trying something new can feel like a challenge. But with PrizePicks, it always feels good to be right. With high-pressure football matchups every weekend and elite hoops action almost every night, the action never slows down, and PrizePicks lets you stay in control. PrizePicks is the daily fantasy app that makes watching sports even more exciting by letting you build lineups based on player projections. No drafts, no waiting, just pick more or less and play your way. Getting started on PrizePicks is quick and simple. The app is super easy to navigate. It's made watching games all the more engaging, especially when following individual player performances, which I love doing, especially in basketball. I love the flexibility too with options like flex play, where you can still get paid even if a pick misses. So download the PrizePicks app today and use the code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, it's good to be right. All right, final crossover Thursday of the regular season for Locked On Eagles and Locked On Commanders. David, if the Commanders do spoil the Eagles' chances of the 2 seed, and again, it's not just the Eagles don't control their destiny here with that number 2 spot in the NFC. They would also need the Chicago Bears to lose to the Lions. But if that happened, Detroit played upset, and Philadelphia won, they would be the 2 seed. So if the Commanders are going to stop that from happening, what are the keys to victory on the Commanders' side to end the season on a high note?
Yeah, so I'm going to go one with the game itself, because really the overall victories for this game are going to come in the silver lining department, whether they win on the scoreboard or not. And that's just where we are with the Washington Commanders this season, right? So on the scoreboard, if they win the game, it's going to be because of their pass rush, because Tanner McKee, like you said, can't really move around as much. Drake Jackson, defensive end, former second-round pick of the San Francisco 49ers. Now he's here with Washington. He's been rehabbing injuries. He came close to sacking Jalen Hurts like 3 times a couple weeks ago. I talked to Drake about that since then. He was like, man, I could taste that first sack. And I mean, for him, going through everything he's gone through to come back on the NFL stage, get a sack, it would be such a great experience. And honestly, it doesn't really matter if it's Jalen Hurts or if it's Tanner McKee. The thing about it is, the reason he came close and didn't get him was because Jalen Hurts was running away from him every time he got close to him. Tanner McKee's not going to be able to do that. If they can get home on Tanner, cause some problems, then obviously every young quarterback, that is kind of the answer, is rattle him a little bit, see if you can do that. So that's the one for the game. But outside of that, man, just be competitive, because there's a lot of questions. Like, does Mikey Sainer still stay inside or go back inside or stay outside where he is right now? Quan Martin has had a rough couple of weeks. Like, obviously he got ejected from that game against the Eagles, but then he had the big blown coverage against Kevontae Turpin and the Dallas Cowboys that resulted in him being benched. Like, his future is up in the air. Jordan McGee, can he finish the season strong? And a lot of the players we talked about in these matchups, like, there's a lot of basically audition games happening for the Washington Commanders, and a lot of information that this team is going to use to make their decisions this offseason. So if they can be competitive, then, like I said, it raises the floor a little bit for the roster depth that Adam Peters is dealing with, and just gives him a better platform to launch into the offseason.
Yeah, absolutely. I think on the Eagles side of things, and again, this game is important, and they do have a chance to get that number 2 seed, which I think is really valuable in the playoffs. I think 3 keys to victory on the field. On offense, I mentioned it a little bit earlier, with Tanner McKee, he's very comfortable with under center play action, and that's been something that I think the Eagles have found. They've been searching for an identity this year on offense, any sort of consistency, just finding a couple things they do really well that they can tap into when they need to move the football. And I think, again, you got to add context to who the opponents were. But when you look at actually that Chargers loss is where things started, and then the Raiders game, the first Commanders game in D.C., under center run and play action passing game did start to work. And I think that's what got them back on track after that 3-game losing streak. Tanner McKee is very comfortable in that way. So that's something I want to see on the offensive side of the football. Playoff Tank Bigsby. I think that's something, if they establish early on, could get Tanner moving. And then I think you should feature Bigsby and Dotson on the offensive side of the football. Darius Cooper, who was an undrafted rookie this year, has been a good contributor as well. Britton Covey is going to be an interesting slot player here in this game, a very explosive punt returner that will now be on the offensive side of the football. But to me, feature Bigsby and Dotson. I think they've been two of your better role players that don't get their number called often because of target monsters like A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, Dallas Goedert, and Saquon Barkley. But I think they're going to show Sunday that they could go to another team, maybe next year even, Dotson's a free agent, and have a bigger role on offense. And then my final thing is just tackling in the open field. I think you look at some of the Eagles' backup defensive backs that had an opportunity where higher draft picks, David, that could have been potential future starters that kind of played their way out of the lineup or out of that opportunity. A big reason was tackling. You look at Keely Ringo at cornerback and Sidney Brown at safety. Both of them this year got legitimate opportunities to start after Drew Makuba went down at safety. There's been just this musical chairs at that third cornerback spot opposite Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean. Ringo and Brown sometimes can be a liability in the open field. So I think tackling is going to be a big problem or a big thing to watch that could decide this game too.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And of course, it's incentives week, right? Like this is the final week of the regular season. The guys go get incentives. Bobby Wagner is 7 tackles from becoming the third linebacker in NFL history to have 2,000 tackles, 7 tackles and half a sack for becoming the second linebacker in history behind only Ray Lewis, with only Ray Lewis, I should say, to have 2,000 tackles and 40 sacks. So I'm interested to see, I was talking to another media member about this today. Yeah. If I'm Dan Quinn, I'm blitzing, I'm rushing Bobby Wagner every snap until he gets at least half the sack.
Yeah, I agree.
And just do it. You know what I mean? Let's just get this thing done. So it's also incentives week, so still some things to look at for that too.
It's going to be a great game on Sunday to wrap up the 2025-2026 NFL regular season. Thanks so much for making us your first listen each and every day right here on the Locked On Eagles and Locked On Commanders podcast. For David Harrison, I'm Lou DiBiase. We'll see you tomorrow. Until then, have a great day, everybody.